Thank you so much, Anna, for the introduction. So my name is Oğuzhan Tekin, and today I'm here with my colleague Vijay Ramjattan, and we are going to be talking about how to go beyond the campus bubble and to rethink university support for and research with international students. So most definitions of international students focus on them being temporary in their host communities and how they do not hold citizenship or permanent residency. And one implication of seeing international students as such, as being temporary, is that they're expected to contribute to the diversity of the campus life during their studies, and then upon graduation, simply leave. And as you can imagine, in this line of thinking, there seems to be no need for them to establish any social or professional networks off campus. And this might explain why most orientation activities focus on life on campus and disregard sociolinguistic realities of the off-campus context. But we acknowledge that international students are part of a larger ecosystem in their host communities, and their experiences go beyond the campus. That's why we need to extend the scope of research beyond the campus bubble to understand and tackle their challenges off campus. And today we're going to be focusing on professional challenges and social challenges. And first up is going to be professional challenges.
Okay, so thank you so much, Osan. So, we'll just go to the next slide. So to illustrate the professional challenges that international students experience, I want to share a story from a participant named Alex, who appeared in a small study that I conducted concerning how international students in Canada conceptualize what I call oral employability, or the ability to be heard as employable. So I'll just go ahead and read the story. So Alex says the following. Me and other international students went to a panel discussion about finding jobs in science after we graduate. One of the students who was Chinese like me asked one of the Canadian scientists there if his Chinese accent would make it hard for him to get a job. The scientist said, scientists have to communicate clearly to share knowledge, so getting rid of any foreign accent will help you. I was surprised when the scientist said this, but it made me realize that having a native Canadian accent will make Canadians not just see me as just a Chinese English speaker. Next slide, please. Okay, so what can we take away from Alex's story? So first, certain job sectors may have a problem with particular aspects of international students' linguistic repertoires. So in the case of Alex, for example, having a so-called Chinese accent is professionally undesirable in the field of science. Second, universities may allow these job sectors to articulate this concern with no institutional pushback, right? So in the case of Alex, once again, Alex's university held this panel discussion without vetting the remarks of the panelists. Finally, concerns about the linguistic repertoires of international student job seekers are typically informed by racist and colonial ideas about these repertoires. So if Alex had an accent and body coded as white, for example, we can safely assume that there would be less concern over his oral employability. Next slide, please. So just as universities can create the so-called linguistic deficiencies of international students within campus, the labor market can also recreate these alleged deficiencies, often with the implicit support of universities, as exemplified by Alex's story. So how does the labor market recreate notions of linguistic deficiency? Okay, so first of all, we can consider English-only policies, for example, right, which deny minoritized workers the ability to use the full range of their linguistic repertoires. We can also think about the skilling of communication, whereby communication is treated as a so-called soft skill to acquire. And if you don't master this alleged soft skill, you're deemed as linguistically lacking. Another related factor concerns how language is often treated as separate from DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, in organizations, since language is often understood in functional terms and not really understood as a core aspect of identity and also a mechanism of oppression. Finally, we can consider the commodification of language training as evidenced by such services as so-called accent reduction programs, that require racially minoritized job seekers to quote unquote whiten their speech. Next slide, please. So what can the university do to support international students in the professional realm? So I basically argue that the university has to become a formal advocate for international student job seekers. So they first need to push employers to change how they engage with these job seekers by doing such things as disassociate from any organization accused of linguistic discrimination. They need to practice what they preach, right, by hiring linguistically diverse faculty and staff to show that being employable doesn't require a specific linguistic repertoire. And finally, they should engage in research collaborations whereby they work with employers to understand what is actually linguistically needed for work, right? Rather than assume that there's a standardized language needed to perform any type of job. They also need to move away from addressing needs to acknowledging the rights of these job seekers. So one strategy offered by Baker et al. 2023 concerns moving away from Eurocentric job advice, which often conditions job seekers into believing that unemployment and underemployment is really an individual failing rather than a structural problem. Okay, so I'm going to end it there and hand it back over to Oğuzhan to continue.
Thanks, Vijay. So in terms of social challenges, there seems to be more discrimination off campus. And perhaps that is why international students sometimes report dissatisfaction with their off-campus interactions, even though they're happy with what their university has to offer on campus. And there's also the fact that they usually have very limited contact with locals, particularly off campus. And in line with this, Sena et al. Reported on international students' experiences in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and suggested that international students' experiences on and off campus were quite distinct from each other. So especially off campus, they felt quite like outsiders, not much of sense of belonging, and experienced name calling on the streets, etc. And although lack of diversity in Belfast was cited as one potential reason for this, the researchers also highlighted the post-conflict nature of the off-campus community. So international students were actually afraid of saying the wrong thing in their interaction with locals. So this points out the importance of the sociopolitical and sociolinguistic realities of host communities. And I would like to give you another and more recent example of this from a different yet similarly complex research context, Montreal, Quebec, which is culturally and linguistically quite distinct from the rest of Canada, where French language and culture is perceived to be threatened and safeguarding it is seen as top priority. So in 2023, my then supervisor and I investigated the impact of this tension between English and French on how international students are perceived socially by the local community off campus. And this was a matched guide study, which I can elaborate more on in the Q&A if there's interest. But in a nutshell, off-campus Francophone locals perceived international students more of a potential friend, neighbor, and a colleague when they heard them speak French than English. And international students were also evaluated less favorably when the content of their speech was charged, as in when they critiqued Quebec's high emphasis on French or secularity, for instance. So all of this is in line with Quebec's history and the nature of its current sociolinguistic context. So basically, what is happening outside the campus matters. So what to do? So research could focus on how to best prepare international students to the sociolinguistic and political realities of their host communities. And universities should take informed action to create off-campus orientation activities. And if there's known cultural or political sensitivities which may result in negative attitudes and behaviors, targeted interventions should be designed. So from research perspective, the integrated threat theory can help locate potential sources of such intergroup feelings. So one of the previous studies that I did earlier, for example, found that there was a strong connection between international students' stereotypes about the off-campus local Francophones and their attitudes toward them. And next, we need to ensure high quality intergroup contact. And when I say high quality, I mean institutionally supported contact where individuals are of equal social status and they interact in a cooperative manner to achieve a common goal. So this is a lot, but that seems to be the ideal way of reducing prejudice. And we also need to extend research beyond campus, even though I know that it's easier to recruit student participants. So participant recruitment was particularly challenging during the studies which I did in Montreal that targeted off-campus individuals. But as a that was especially because I'm a non-French speaking outsider researcher, but it was definitely worth the effort. So for instance, findings from that research showed significant higher linguistic threat off campus than on campus, which alerted us to the fact that international students should be encouraged to use French more off campus for more positive interactions, while at the same time, we should also put in the work to address locals' feelings of threat from international students with regard to French. So reminding locals how challenging it can be to acquire another language in a short time while working on both academic and social adjustment in a new country. Now, back to you, Vijay.
Thank you, Hassan. So yeah, so in our very concise presentation, you may have noticed that we mainly offered practice-based recommendations for change, but obviously this is a conference about research with international students. So we wanted to just pose the following question to all of you, just to think of our topic in terms of future research. So the question is a simple one. What types of research questions or topics need further exploration in terms of international student experiences in the professional and social realms? Of course, if you have other questions, we're happy to answer them as well, but we'll use this as sort of a starting off point for any conversation. Okay, so thank you very much.